Welcome to another edition of Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President, Local 237 Teamsters. With us once again, our very special guest, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance. This is Attorney Vance. Welcome back to Reaching Out.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to see you again.
All right. And I want to say, since taking office in 2010, you've expanded the role of District Attorney, the city's judicial system, President of the United States Cybercrime Unit, Counterterrorism Unit, the landmark courtroom victories of Trump versus Vance and People versus Weinstein, one of reaffirming that the presidents are not immune from criminal prosecution, and the other creating a gold standard in the field of sex crime prosecutions. You've been aggressive with your investigations against 11 of the world's largest banks for falsifying records and forfeitures of $14 billion. $250 million was seized in the DA's investigation and investigated in 50 communities grounded in organizations. And 7.4 million went to workers. Right-sizing the justice system. You've been slashing prosecutions by 58%. And you have a lot of prosecutions against gun violence, 1,800 guns from New York City streets, 55 backlog rape kits across 20 states, and 105 new convictions. You've been very busy with your career, and I understand we all know that you are not seeking another term, so this will be your last term. We want to thank you for public service. And I wanted to tell you that I, for one, will miss you because you were my first ever endorsement as president of Local 237. And, you know, people say you always remember the first time you did something. You were the first person to ever ask me for an endorsement. When you came into my office, you sat down with me, and I was very happy to go over your record and say, we're going to endorse you.
Well, Greg, I appreciated your support then, and I appreciated your leadership of your union and your role in Teamsters over the last 12 years. I think very often I'm picking up the paper and I'm seeing that you're doing something that's enhancing public safety, enhancing the, your workers' rights. They're not mutually exclusive, and I think folks in the public don't often understand that these jobs around public safety require us, you and myself, to balance enhancing public safety, but making sure that the system that we're responsible for operating is also one that is fair and perceived by the public to be fair. And in your role, you've had to address that, and in mine, I have as well.
You're so right. I often thought of that, but my dad always told me, do your job because people pay attention to what you're doing even though you don't think they pay attention. So I didn't know you were reading that, and that's how you perceived it. But that's I would say sort of I'm flattered that you said that, because that's how I perceive my role. Public safety. When we say we want more school safety officers, we want metal detectors, and we don't want the elimination of school safety, it's not because that Greg wants to expand his membership. It's because that's what's needed for our New York City public schools, and that's what's needed to keep our school children safe. And I'm a dad, and I really take my job serious when it comes to safety. And I feel for every parent that has to worry about their children being safe in our schools.
Well, it's a big responsibility,
Yes.
and school safety has been a big issue and a controversial issue on how we achieve school safety over Mr. Mayor Bloomberg's last term, 2 terms, and certainly during Mr. de Blasio's as well. So you're in the middle of it.
Yes. So let me ask you, that would segue into how have you worked to reform the justice system as your time being the Manhattan District Attorney?
Well, I would start, Greg, with following the conversation we just had. I came to this job after 20 years as a lawyer in private practice, principally doing criminal defense. So I understood well both the responsibilities of the prosecutor and the impact of prosecutions on people accused of crime. We just talked about balance, public safety, and fairness. I viewed my job when I came to the office as absolutely, my job is to enhance public safety. I saw it, and I think I have done that. And also, my job is to enhance fairness in our courts and the perception of it. Because that is obviously the responsibility of a prosecutor, not just to focus on public safety. And what's defined me, Greg, is I wanted to use no more authority and power than necessary in order to try to achieve the fair justice system we're seeking. So here's what we did in terms of criminal justice reform. I came into the office and we were prosecuting 100,000 cases a year. 80% of those were misdemeanor cases, which are beneath felonies. And some misdemeanor cases are very serious, and some misdemeanor cases aren't. And a lot of misdemeanor cases that are less serious are proportionally impacting communities of color. When you look at marijuana possession, when you look at the issue of theft of services, jumping over a turnstile, where you get some of the highest volume arrests by the police department, an overwhelming percentage of those arrests and a disproportionate amount have been on communities of color. And so what I decided to do was, first, I brought in the Vera Institute of Justice to evaluate racial bias in our office over a 3-year period. And Vera is a well-respected criminal justice think tank. And they came out with a report which indicated, first, it's good to know what the situation was. And we found that there were parts of the work that we did that we could do better in terms of making sure that we were getting the same outcomes for similarly situated defendants, but coming from different backgrounds. And the second thing I did was focused on those crimes that I felt didn't need to come into the justice system, be prosecuted as, in our courts as misdemeanors, because we could get better results by alternative means. So in 2010, we had 100,000 cases, 8,000 misdemeanors. In the end of 2019, the misdemeanors we've dropped our prosecution to 45,000. So that's a huge reduction in the prosecution of certain level offenses. Now, the question you should ask is, well, did that make us safer, Si? I mean, I hear all about quality of life policing and broken windows. Isn't that running up against that philosophy? What's interesting, Greg, is during that period when we were reducing these prosecutions and doing 3 things, we were either diverting them to programs after they had come into court, we were diverting them before court into programming, and in some cases we were issuing summonses, no longer prosecuting. And what happened is violent crime continued to decline in New York City from 2010 to 2019, at the same time that the Manhattan Attorney's Office had the largest reduction of prosecution of low-level offenses than any DA I know in the country. So my point is, to folks who worried about the variances that we need to focus on, I think the answer is, again, they're not mutually exclusive. You can redefine where you want to exert your criminal justice authority and reduce that footprint, mindful that you need to provide alternatives and you need to fund those alternatives and you need to be supportive in the community, at the same time focusing on violent crime. So that's the second thing we did to focus on making our criminal justice system fairer. And that has been, those diversion programs and those alternatives, I think, have, during that time period, worked very well. Now, it is also true that we're in a remarkable period right now. 2020, with COVID, everything went out the window, not just in New York City, but in every major city in the country. A rise in gun violence, a rise in incidences of mental illness, a rise in homelessness. And that's of great concern to this office, and it should be to all of us. But Greg, I do not intend to, and I don't think my successor will intend to return back to the days when we were charging 80,000 people for jumping over turnstiles or minor offenses that can be handled I think, better outside of the court system, particularly when we're talking about young men and women for whom a conviction in their, in their late teens or early 20s can have a real negative impact on their going forward.
Yeah, you free up the court system, you streamline the court system, and you just have the most violent felonies and violent criminals going through the court system rather than have ordinary citizens to make minor mistakes go through the court system.
Well, we do have, there are misdemeanor crimes which we do prosecute, and those are domestic violence, they're assault, they're stalking, DWIs. I mean, this is a high volume operation, but we've managed to, I think, find the right balance. And my responsibility is when I leave this office and give it to my successor, leave it so that he has a strong foundation to continue this kind of philosophy if he chooses to going forward. We have these diversion programs and alternative programs built into our system here in the office. I believe in. I think most people understand their value, and so I think the work we did has significantly enhanced justice reform efforts in the city of New York.
What are you most proud of?
Well, after 12 years, this office has done a lot of remarkable things. It's gone to the Supreme Court twice, as you said, in the case of Donald Trump v. Vance, on the principle that no one, even the president, is immune from investigation for his conduct as a private citizen. We've brought in $14 billion to the federal and state governments, which is funding important programming federally and nationally. We reduced our caseloads in the way that we've just discussed. We have created a 75-person cyber investigation unit responding to the needs of today, which is cybercrime is involved with everything that happens in criminal justice. But if I were to pick one thing, it would be that with the funds we received from the bank cases, what we call forfeiture, that came to our office, ultimately about $1 billion, that we have funded important New York City government partners and also funded our communities directly in several ways. We took $100 million sample and gave it to the NYPD about 5 years ago so they could pay for and bring online their mobility system. So every cell phone that an NYPD officer has now, every iPad in a car, which is giving that officer the ability to essentially have one police plaza in his hand or her hand in terms of understanding what's going on in the street and getting information. That's an investment that only happened because we had the ability to make that contribution, and that was a generation opportunity. So there's an example that I was very proud to support the police in making them safer and smarter on the streets. That's good for us. That's good for the citizenry. But we also took $250 million, Greg, and we essentially started what was the largest criminal justice foundation in the country. And over the course of 5 years, we carefully investigated who should receive grants, what local not-for-profits, not necessarily the big not-for-profits who have a big staff and can more easily apply for funding from organizations. But we focused on 3 areas, Greg. We focused on kids and families at risk of criminal justice involvement. We focused on particularly vulnerable victims like LGBTQ or transgender. And we focused on reentry, returning citizens coming back to us from jail or prison. And we invested $250 million in roughly 6 programs that have been ongoing for the last 3 years and will continue past the time I leave. And that's, we talk about defunding the police. We talk about what's the, where should public monies go outside of strict police guns and cars and overtime. I think what our office did provided, I think, a national model, and I'm trying to be prideful, but a national model that doesn't have to be at the scale that did it, but how offices around the country can look to the best community organizations in their communities, and how do you get the money to the best organizations serving the areas that you prioritize to receive those monies. And For example, Greg, we started in 2010 opening up one gym in Harlem to start a program we called Saturday Night Lights, which was a sports program, a super sports program with the best trainers for young men and women, 12 to 18 years old, because there was no gym open in that neighborhood on Friday and Saturday nights, which is insane. Today, we have 100 gyms in New York City open. We started with one, we took it up to 20 in Manhattan, and then just this last year, because of the success of our programming, which had worked with over 25,000 kids over the last 8-9 years, the mayor said, we want to take that citywide. Now that's an investment that wouldn't have happened without these dollars from the forfeiture cases. And that one gym turned into 100 gyms. And it's training on soccer and basketball and dance. All kids throughout the city. Those are the kinds of programs that I am very proud that our office has been involved with, because long after I leave, Saturday Night Lights will be reaching out to kids in neighborhoods all over the city, many of those neighborhoods economically disadvantaged, and bringing them into a structure which teaches leadership, which teaches team play, which fosters respect among from the same neighborhood, but sometimes affiliated with different groups in that neighborhood. And it brings the police and prosecutors, law enforcement, and the public together. There's an example. And those, that $250 million is, when I look back, that will be one of the things that I thought we brought to New York that was unique and actually a model for the nation. And I gotta say, I was very proud of the work of our prosecutors in cases like Trump v. Vance or Harvey Weinstein, or solving the Eitan Pates murder, the 1979 murder that had gone unsolved for 40 years. And when the Pates family came to me in 2010 and said, "Cy, we'd like you to look at this again," I said, "We will, but I don't know if there's any way that we can do what the FBI hasn't done or what other investigators haven't done." But we came in with an open mind. We have some of the best investigators and attorneys in the world, and we solved the question of who killed Eitan Pates, an unsolved question that was really a sort of a dark, sad story that didn't have an ending. And while the family knew that they had lost Eitan, didn't have closure as to who had done it. And for years, they never changed their phone number since 1979, thinking that if Eitan is alive, he will someday maybe call us. They never locked their door, their loft and so for those 35 years, because they thought maybe one day if Eitan is alive, he will want to come home, and he needs to know that he can walk into his home. It's just a terribly deep and sad.
What was the result of that death? How was it solved? I mean, what was
we identified who killed him. We found out who killed. We after a long investigation and a couple of breaks, we were able to identify who killed Eitan. He was arrested. He confessed. Evidence corroborated his confession amply, and it was a long prosecution. Took several years, but ultimately this office, our lawyers, did what no other lawyers and investigators had done in 35 years. And it's because, and this is what this office and I am proud of, is that we have lawyers who are the best, who are the most compassionate, and the commitment this office placed in solving Eitan Pates' mystery is an example of what they do every day. And I wish the public could know and understand that more, but I have been privileged to be in the middle of this and seen it happen and helped to guide it, and I will be very proud of that.
Well, I could say your position as Manhattan District Attorney is probably the most prestigious, famous district attorney in the world. Your cases prior to you and now legendary, and the Manhattan District Attorney sets the standard for all law enforcement all over the world in this country. So
the Manhattan DA has that ability, and it's the responsibility of everybody who wins this job by election to make sure that when they take it over, they raise the bar from where they received it. And my goal was to take the best 20th century prosecutor's office, which was under Bob Morgenthau, and make sure that it was the best 21st century DA's office in the country, and in my time in the 21st century. And my successor is doing things differently than I did in some areas. Totally understandable. We have to evolve. But his job will be, it might be him because there's two men running, his job will be to raise the bar even higher.
Yeah, when you said him, I knew you were referring to there are two men running, and not saying that a woman couldn't do the job, but at this point.
Well, a woman could certainly do this job.
Yeah, at this day, a woman is not running for that office currently. So.
Well, women run for this office, and there were some excellent candidates,
yes.
Of every background and every gender.
Sure. So we have about a minute and a half left.
It went quickly.
Yeah, it did. It certainly did. Is there anything you want to say in a minute and a half? You probably have more interviews to do on your way out, but give us something special on your way out, minute and a half.
Well, I think one of the most important functions of a district attorney's office in the last decade has been to be open to the concept that mistakes occur in our justice system, and when they do occur, that the office be open-minded about reinvestigating those cases and correcting those errors if they were made. We were one of the first offices in the country to start what we call a conviction integrity unit, which is essentially typically a post-conviction review in case where we think there may have been errors and injustice. And I'm proud to say that this group that we started, the conviction integrity unit, has investigated, vacated, and dismissed 118 cases over the course of the last 12 years, in cases where we believed that that fairness required that the case be vacated and dismissed. And there are cases always involving someone, a real person who's gone to jail, sometimes for a long time. And when the information to us in those cases showing that we should investigate and try to correct a wrong, we did. And that's part of the job today of a prosecutor's office, which really wasn't as important or institutionalized in prosecution offices in decades before. Greg, I think it speaks to the balance that is required when you lead an office like this. You want an aggressive prosecutor, you want someone who has good management, but you also want someone who tempers their aggression with humility, tempers their desire to protect victims with humility. And the creation of a unit like that is a statement that when we see errors have been made, might have been before me, might have been during my tenure, we have to own those errors, and and that's what transparency is about in a prosecutor's office, and what it always should be about.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for this segment of Reaching Out. Very special guest was Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, and Cyrus Vance will be leaving us, I believe, at the end of the year. And we certainly enjoyed having you on our show numerous times. And this is not goodbye, because you could come back anytime you want in your next endeavor. If you want to come on a radio show and speak about what you're doing next, or any issues that you want to speak about, you're always welcome to come back on Reaching Out. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and a great partner, and thank you to your team and to the union for the work they've done in our schools and keeping our communities safe. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.